Hello everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be getting started very soon, but while we wait for a few more attendees to join us, I'm just going to send out a quick poll for you to answer. And if you can respond to that by just clicking the relevant answer on the screen. I think we're due to start probably in about a minute, so we'll just wait for everybody to turn up. Okay then, thank you for that. So, good afternoon everybody, thanks for joining us this afternoon. You will see on our screen an agenda for the session today. So after a few introductions, we'll start with an overview of the new VISA Food and Cookery qualification. That's currently with the DFE pending approval for inclusion on the 2020 performance tables. So just to clarify, the qualification's not yet approved, but we are expecting feedback from the latest submission this month. So you might know that the first time we submitted the qualification, it wasn't successful in gaining approval for the performance tables, but the feedback we got from the DFE was very specific and detailed, and we have responded to that, and we'll be highlighting those changes as we go through the session today. We're then going to look at the unit content for the external assessment and then the internal synoptic assessment for the qualifications before we look at the learning resources that will be available to support you with your planning and delivery. And you will notice that this time close to the end of the presentation for questions, but I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions about the new model, and I'd really like to encourage you to ask these throughout the session so we can make the webinar really interactive. And you can do this by typing into the question bar, which should be on your screen. We're going to try and make time after each topic to answer these questions before we move on to the next one. So we'll do a few introductions before we start. So my name's Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE. My role within the curriculum team is to support centres with the planning, delivery and assessment of the VCERT qualifications. Also joining us this afternoon is Pauline Bland. Pauline's a subject specialist and the Chief EQA for Food and Cookery, and she's going to be talking us through the new specification today. So Pauline's accessing the webinar remotely. Hello Pauline. Right, okay, we seem to have lost Pauline. Right, okay, I'll move on anyway and hopefully she'll log back in. So I'm going to send out another very quick poll. I know we'll have a lot of attendees this afternoon, and I just want to see how many of you actually currently deliver our current model. So if you could just let me know if you have experience of the current model VCERT in Food and Cookery. That's great, thank you. So 75% of attendees today have experience with the current model. That's just crept up to close to 80%. So thank you for responding to that. Right, okay then. So we're going to start with this chart here, and this shows us how the qualifications assessed. You can see that it's constructed of 2 units. Unit 1 is an external assessment, and that's worth 40% of the qualification. This is in line with the minimum percentage for external assessment set by DFE, and the remaining 60% comes from an internally assessed Synoptic Project. So the overall qualification grades available range from level 1 pass right up to level 2 distinction. There is a distinction star as well, level 2 distinction star, and that could be achieved if a learner achieves a level 2 distinction overall. That's how that would be assessed. So all level 1 and level 2 are included within one qualification, so that's as opposed to the current model where level 1 and level 2 are 2 separate qualifications. So on this slide you can see a suggested delivery guide. The VCERTs have been designed to be delivered over 1, 2 or 3 years depending on what's best for your circumstances, but this model shows a 2-year delivery, and you can see that it's been designed for Unit 1, which is the external assessment, to be delivered and sat by learners first. So they would sit that before completing the internal Synoptic Project. And there is an opportunity for a resit if needed in the following session or the following academic year. Each learner would be entitled to 1 resit, so 2 attempts in total. So for the qualification, there are 5 assessment objectives for learners to meet in the qualification. These are applied synoptically, and they're the same across the full suite of V-certs. So if I show you this next slide, this shows which unit is assessing which AO. So you can see that the external assessment is assessing AOs 1, 2 and 3. So AO1 is select knowledge, AO2 is apply in knowledge, and AO3 is analyse and evaluate knowledge. And in the internal synoptic project, unit 2 is assessing all of the AOs. So if I go back, you can see that that includes AO4, which is demonstrate and apply. So that's the more practical element. And then AO5, which is managing and evaluate the project. So, as I mentioned, the external assessment is worth 40% of the full qualification, and that will be allocated a maximum of 80 marks. So this score will be the learner's raw marks, and they will then be converted to a maximum of 160 UMS marks, and that will calculate the final grade. And Pauline's going to be talking about this further on in the session today. The assessment will last an hour and a half, and that will be made up of multiple choice, short answer and extended response questions. So this has been changed. This is one of the changes that we have made in light of the recent feedback from the DFE. And if you've had a good look at the previous draft version of the external assessment that was published on the website, you might notice a change in the most recent draft external assessment. So they have been made in response to feedback, and the feedback was that there wasn't enough of an opportunity for learners to demonstrate assessment objective 3, which requires learners to analyse and evaluate knowledge, theories and concepts. So this has now been remedied, and the draft external assessment, which is currently on the website, reflects that. So if you have had a look at those two, you should notice a difference there. So the internal synoptic project is worth 60% of the overall qualification, and the suggested completion time for that project is 22 hours. The brief for the project will be released every December, and it will change annually. So it's important to understand here that the learners have got to access and respond to the brief in the year that they're going to complete the qualification. So if you're doing a traditional 2-year delivery over years 10 and 11, learners would access the brief in the December of year 11. So that's going to give you that spring term for your learners to respond to that. If you're doing 2-year delivery over years 9 and 10, learners would access the brief in the December of year 10, as that's the year that they would be completing the qualification. The performance points achieved in that instance would be carried over to when the learners leave in year 11. So this slide here demonstrates the compensatory model of the qualification. So you can see that in the first 2 examples, the learner has achieved a level 1 pass. That's the lowest grade possible for the external assessment. But if they perform really well in the internal assessment, they can still achieve a level 2 pass or even a level 2 merit overall. The bottom 2 scenarios show that if a learner doesn't pass either of the units, they won't pass the qualification overall. So while the qualification is compensatory, learners do need to pass both of the units to actually achieve the qualification. Right, okay, I'm just going to have a look and see if any questions have come in. If you've got any questions at all. So Susan's asked, will the slides be available to view after the webinar? Yes, there will be. So it usually takes me a few days to pull everything together because we are recording the webinar as well. So I'm going to get our digital team to upload that to YouTube. That normally takes a day or so. And then I'll email you a link to that recording. I'll email you the slides, and I'll email you a transcript of all of the questions and answers from today as well. So yes, you can view this afterwards. Now I'm hoping that Pauline's going to be available. Pauline, can you hear me? Hello, Pauline? I'm not sure where Pauline's gone, which is a bit of a concern. I'm just going to check the attendee list here and make sure that she is actually signed in. No, she seems to have disappeared. Right. What I'm going to do, this is a first. Oh no, she seems to be there. Pauline, can you hear me?
I'm back on now. I don't know what happened
brilliant.
there. It's been beeping.
My heart was beating like I don't know what there, Pauline. I've never had to deal with that before. I'm so relieved
I
to hear
sent you
your
an
voice.
email and things, but
Oh,
I've tried ringing in more than once, but it finally got through
well,
again. So I don't know whether we're going to have the same problem.
Well, hopefully we're not going to lose you again. But I've covered...
There's just a beeping on the line, like a beep, beep, like that.
Well, everyone, this is Pauline. She's going to be talking through the unit content with you today. So I've covered the first section, Pauline. We've had one question about whether attendees can receive the recording afterwards, which I've responded to. So if we can move on to slide 13, and
right,
we can start going through the Unit 1 content, if that's okay.
Okay.
Please keep your questions coming in, and we'll respond to them throughout the session.
Hello, everybody. I'm back. I don't know what happened there, but there's obviously a technical hitch. We're looking at slide 13 now, which really is about the external assessment. There'll be two windows for the external assessment in each session, one in the autumn and one in the spring, and learners will have the opportunity to resit on one occasion. The questions will enable learners to demonstrate their breadth of knowledge and understanding of the subject and ensure achievement at the appropriate level, and that should provide sufficient stretch and challenge. Key things to remember are that for the external assessment, it's based only on the first three assessment objectives: collect knowledge and show understanding, apply knowledge and understanding, and analyze and evaluate knowledge through theories and concepts. And you can see that they lend themselves very well to a written form of assessment. There will be a variety of styles used on the paper, and that's to enable level 1 and level 2 learners to access the questions, and that'll include multiple choice questions, some short answer questions, and some extended responses. And some of those extended responses could be up to 9 marks. The assessment should be in fairly straightforward English so that learners will find it accessible and won't be confused or put off by the questions or the options that are offered. There will be the opportunity, as I've said, for them to resit if necessary. Once they've taken the assessment, the raw mark grade boundaries are set after that assessment window, once there's been some qualitative and quantitative analysis, and that will obviously change from series to series. And then they will be converted into the uniform mark scale, just as you do with the GCSE, which some of you may well be familiar with. That will all be worked out within the NCSE IT system, so you won't need to worry about that. So the raw marks are subject to change depending on the paper, and often it's to do with the level of challenge and difficulty of the paper, but the UMS mark will remain the same. It's important to remember that learners must achieve an overall grade at a level 1 pass to achieve the external assessment. But if you look at the UMS mark score on the slide for a level 1 pass, it's 24 to 46, so it's not a huge amount of marks, which probably, for those of you who are familiar with the existing external assessment, where they have to meet all the assessment criteria, that perhaps will be an area that will be less challenging, or certainly won't prevent learners achieving an overall pass. Moving on to the next slide. Here we're going to look at Unit 1, which is obviously the unit that is externally assessed, and that's the title for that is the Principles of Food Safety, Food Nutrition and Food Choice. It's divided into 3 learning outcomes, and again, if you are familiar with the existing research, this will all sound familiar to you. Understand health and safety relating to food and cookery, understand food and nutrition, and understand factors that affect food choice. The guided learning hours for this unit are 48, and the unit weighting is 40%. It's externally assessed, which is the sole method of assessment, and is set by NCFE. So we won't be interested in what your learners there with regard to a portfolio of evidence. The only thing that will count for this particular unit is how they fare on the examination. It's important to understand and this is a slight departure from the existing research, that any aspect within this unit can be externally assessed. So the difference now is that there is a broader area of work that may be externally assessed. But that's why we've been very specific in the content, because if it's not specified, we cannot assess on it. So I think that's something that you need to be fully aware of, really. And also that if it's not there, we cannot assess it. If it is there, any of it can be assessed on. And obviously this is leading towards an exam, and so has a theoretical knowledge content. But it's really important to remember that though this unit is externally assessed, practical work should be taught alongside it so that it remains interesting, it engages the learners, they can make that link between practice and theory, and it also will facilitate their recall. And at the same time, it will be preparing them for the Synoptic Project, which draws on all aspects of the course within Unit 1 and Unit 2. So moving on to the next slide. Here we're looking at a bit more detail now of Unit 1. So this really is Learning Outcome 1, and you can see the areas that it covers. Obviously, starts with the very things that you're familiar with, that we're looking at safe and hygienic working practices relating to the self and the cooking environment, potential risks and hazards in the cooking environment. HACCP we have added in quite specifically now, which wasn't there before. So that's one of the few changes in the content that you might note. Looking at how we minimize risks in the cooking environment, and looking at the range of cooking equipment and utensils that learners might typically use when they're working in a kitchen and cooking a range of dishes. Can you still hear me? Just checking.
Yes, we can still hear you, Pauline.
Yeah, sorry. For a minute it was beeping again, so I was just worrying that I'd disappeared.
Sounds coming in and out. I don't know if everybody else is experiencing that. I'm not sure if that's the internet connection or whatever, but we can still hear you. We're still with you.
Okay, that's good. So they're the key things on that Unit 1. As you can see, if you look in the specs, you'll see that we've been quite specific about things like hand washing, for practices for health and safety methods, things like correct clothing, hair tied back, no jewellery, no makeup, appropriate footwear, things like blue plasters to be used to cover any cuts and grazes. Key things within the environment that you'll be familiar with: sanitising work surfaces, checking floors for spillages, equipment prior to use being checked for cleanliness, trailing cables, position of trailing cables near water and anything that's plugged in, ensuring that electrical equipment is not used, in other words, near water, and also getting them to consider things like the risks. So are they aware, first of all, of the types of contamination, whether that's physical, chemical, or biological, and can they link these things to things like cuts, burns and scalds, trips, slips and falls, bacteria entering food and causing illness, food spoilage, physical harm from debris. All of those things we've specified, and that means that it's really clear to you these are the things that have got to be taught. It's not referencing a range. If it's on the specifications, you need to have taught it, because it could be something that the learners are tested on in the external assessment. HACCP is in there specifically, so they've got to know the ways HACCP minimises risks for a business, and they've got to understand the key critical control points. We've talked about some of the risks that they need to minimise. And then, of course, there's cooking equipment. And they, again, need to know and understand safe preparation, use, cleaning, and storage of a range of utensils, which again we've specified now, and also equipment, which we've specified. And that's purely because if it's not specified, we can't test on it. So though there may be, you may use other utensils and equipment, if it's not specified in the specifications, we wouldn't test the learners on it in the external assessment. So it's not definitive in that sense, but obviously in order be able to say you could be tested on this. We have to be quite clear and specific about what those items are. Again, the key thing is, obviously you're preparing them for an external assessment, and it is theoretically based, but it's really important that practical work is taught alongside of this in order to apply and reinforce the theory into the practice, and also to make sure that it becomes something that learners will find more easily to recall, because it's linked to scenarios, practical situations, cooking situations, so that they're not just being taught it from the point of view of this is a theory test and you've got to know this particular area or body of knowledge. So moving on to 16. Now we're looking at learning outcome 2, which is understand food and nutrition. And this is quite a big area or body of work, as you'll see as we go through it. They're looking at food groups and food provenance. So they've got to make sure that they understand about food groups, which I'll come on into a minute, and know the provenance of those foods within the food group. There's a big section on healthy eating. Some of this will have been more familiar to you with the external assessment, Unit 3 in the current spec. They've got to know about balanced diet, all the nutrients, their sources, their function, any nutrient imbalances, what the consequences of those are, and the importance of dietary fibre in the diet in the short term, in the long term, making sure that they can make food recommendations for a range of specific groups of people and for food-related health conditions, and also understanding the nutritional information on food labels. So they need to know the Eat Well guide, which you're all familiar with. They need to know the food provenance in terms of things being farm-grown, reared, processed or manufactured, and they should be able to link those sources back to the Eat Well guide and the individual foods so that they have a good understanding of the provenance of where their food comes from. They should be able to get examples of foods from each of these sources. And again, it's quite clear that it's important that they really do understand the difference between food groups and nutrients, because currently in the VCERT we see a lot of confusion around that in the externally assessed Unit 3. So it's making sure that they really do understand the difference between those. And thinking again about how you can teach this in a way that's engaging, that uses different scenarios, uses things like food diaries, so that they begin to be well aware of different types of diet for different food, different age groups or different dietary needs, making sure that they can make the distinction between the nutrients and the food groups, can actually name, for example, deficiency diseases linked to individual nutrients, and they know the consequence of eating too much or too little of key nutrients. Making sure that they're aware of allergies and that they can read a food label, that they understand some of the key allergens like gluten, lactose intolerance, that type of thing, nut allergies, and that they can read a label and can extract information from that. So you can see there's quite a lot there to do, making sure that they can understand how to create diaries or create menus suitable for people with individual needs, and making sure that they understand the healthy eating, government healthy eating tips, and that they're clear about the definition of a balanced diet linked to the Eat Well guide as well. And it does list all the key nutrients when you look at the specs, so it's very clear which nutrients that they need to include, which nutrient imbalances that must also take into consideration. I won't go through all of that at the minute, but it's quite clear the range of things that you have to cover. It specifies the age ranges for the making food recommendations for specific groups of people, so you'll see that that's specified there. And it also identifies the food-related health conditions, such as lactose intolerance, as I said, wheat intolerance, celiac disease, nut allergy, coronary heart disease, that type of thing. They need to be able to read the labels. They need to understand vegetarian symbol and vegan symbol, the traffic light symbols on a label, and any allergy advice that would support that. So you can see that's quite a meaty area of work that forms part of Unit 1 in Learning Outcome 2. And again, any of that that's specified in the specifications, they could have a question on. And then if we look at Learning Outcome 3 for Unit 1, that's principles of food safety, food nutrition and food choice. We're looking at the factors that affect or determine food choice. So we're looking at social factors, and again we've specified what that will include, for example, cultural, religion, the locality, where they live, access to shops, how that impacts upon your food choice, accessibility in terms of what transport is available, whether shopping online is an option, the cost factor that also brings in, personal, so whether the choice is down to personal being vegetarian or vegan, or they're looking at environmental, making sure that they can understand the cause and effect food choices have on the environment. So we're looking at food miles, carbon footprint, pesticide use, all of those things that they've got to be quite clear on. They've got to look at seasonality and know the benefits of that, know some of the key fruit and veg, etc., that's available at different times of the year. And again, we've specified that for you in the specification. And then we're looking at things like the benefits in terms of nutritional value, reduced food miles, all of those sorts of things. They need to be able to understand and perhaps use in an external assessment. It's useful, again, if they can perhaps within their own class, so that they're not just looking at this in theory, but looking at people with different religions, looking at people who have particular food preferences and drawing on that. Because again, though it's engaging for the learners, if it can be something based around practical scenarios, they can move on to actually cooking for those particular health groups, for preference, for dietary need, etc. Because obviously they will need to do some cooking in Unit 1 in preparation for the Synoptic Project for Unit 2. And it's very important that Unit 1 isn't just seen as a theoretical unit because it's leading to a written exam. So moving on to Unit 1, the external assessment, we've got on there, it's not very clear I'm afraid, but apparently we haven't been allowed to remove the draft element to it. But that shows you on there 1 or 2 questions that you might actually see on the exam paper. So this is a draft. And remember, it's tested against only 3 of the AAOs, 1, 2 and 3. You can see an example of a multiple choice question there, I think, that carries 1 mark. You can see another question which carries 4 marks, and then an extended question that carries 9 marks. So that's just to give you an example of the sorts of things that might appear on the paper. There will always be a mix of multiple choice, short answer and extended, and it will always be a paper that is aimed at level 1 and level 2. So it's the same paper whichever level your learners are at. It's 90 minutes long, or an hour and a half, and they are strongly advised, obviously, to complete all of the questions. They're all compulsory in the sense that there is no choice. They do have 2 attempts at the external assessment, and the good news is the higher grade always stands. So if you had a learner that perhaps achieved a pass and you thought it was worth them having an additional attempt to see if they could achieve a merit, and for whatever reason they achieved and not yet achieved, the pass would still stand. So it's not the latest grade that stands, it's just the higher. So that's something to bear in mind. They do have, as I've said, a second attempt in order to either improve their grade, or if they didn't achieve, to hopefully pass. And again, learners must achieve at least a level 1 pass to achieve the overall qualification. Okay, I think that completes that.
Yeah, that's great. We have had a
element.
few, yeah, we've had a few questions. So Belinda asked, where it says all questions are compulsory, what happens if
Yes.
learners miss a question?
Well, that in itself may not be a problem. If they miss a question, obviously they've missed an opportunity to gain some marks. But as I've said, they only have to achieve a minimum of a level 1 pass, which was quite a small number of marks, wasn't it? Something like 24 to 40. So it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world by any means, because all they have to do is to achieve the minimum of a level 1 pass. So they may miss one question, more than one question, and because it's a combined paper, it's likely that level 1 learners may miss out some questions, or indeed may only be able to answer smaller elements of it where they would gain some marks, but perhaps couldn't achieve, say, for example, the full 9 marks on an extended question.
Yeah, I think it's, well,
So not critical.
it's not critical.
Good advice to say attempt them all.
Yeah, not like the current model though, where if they miss a
No,
question, they
not like
could
can't
fail
know.
entirely. That's not the same. But like Pauline mentioned, with the 9-mark questions, that might put some learners off. But even if they just attempt it, even if they get 1 or 2 marks, it all counts towards their final grade. So they really, you know, would encourage them to try and answer every one. So Catherine's asked,
Absolutely, yes.
yeah, Catherine's asked, do you list the current, the cooking equipment and utensils to be covered in 1.1.5? So I think you've covered that already, where yes, they are listed, aren't they?
They are. They are. As I said, it doesn't mean to say that you won't use other pieces of equipment and utensils, because you will determine which dishes your learners cook, providing they cover the range of skills that we'll come on to when we're looking at Unit 2. So you may use other pieces in addition to those that we have listed. The important point to remember is we cannot test your learners on things that aren't listed. So you will know these are the only items of utensil and pieces of equipment that they can be tested on in the external assessment.
Yeah, that's right. So we've had another question here from Susan. Will there still be an expectation to look into industrial cooking environments and equipment and utensils?
Not specifically. Obviously, if they can access their canteen, they'll see a range of equipment and utensils. But if you look at the list, you'll see that we haven't listed things that would be just specifically available in commercial kitchens, for example. So not quite in the same way, no.
Yeah, Carolyn's asked a very similar question. So good practice, like you say, to show them the school or an industrial environment would be fantastic, but they won't be assessed on anything that's not in the specification. So,
No.
Right, so Victoria's asked, will there be an external assessment this November if the qualification is approved? So for this year only, there won't be. Usually there will be an assessment in the autumn and the spring terms, but for this first year through, if your learners are in year 11 and you're doing this in 1 year, you would do the current model, not the new model, because it's only approved on the 2020 tables, not the 2019. And if your learners were in year 10 and you wanted to put them through in 1 year, for this year, they would have 1 attempt in the spring. However, if they did need a resit for this year, this time through, they could access one of the windows when they were in year 11, even if they had technically completed the qualification. And Susan's asked, is the second attempt free for the external assessment? No, they're not. So the second attempt is classed as a resit, and there would be a fee that goes with that as well. So that's all of the questions that we've had relating to Unit 1. So if we move on to, oh, hang on a second, we've just had another quick one in from Catherine. If Year 10 learners sit the March exam and the synoptic details aren't released until December of Year 11, what happens between March and December? Well, then that would be when you would teach the content for Unit 2, which Pauline's about to go through now. So it's really important that you remember that this assessment, this Synoptic project, is designed to take place over 22 hours. and learners need to have been taught everything before they actually start the external assessment. So that's, start the internal assessment. So that period that you're referring to there, Catherine, between March and December is when you would be delivering the content. And Hayley...
Can I just add to that,
Yeah,
Karen?
definitely.
And just to say that the practical work that you do alongside Unit 1 will also be relevant, because everything that you do in terms of developing their skills will be things that they will need when they come to do the Synoptic Project. So any practical work leading up to the external assessment and any between the external assessment and actually having the Synoptic Project released is the time at which you are developing their practical skills, their evaluative skills, their ability to write action plans, etc., so that when they see the Synoptic Project, they are well prepared.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So Hayley's asked, would the resit mark stand or will the highest grade be banked? That would be the highest grade, Hayley. So if for some reason their second attempt they achieved a lower grade than the first attempt, it would still be the highest one that applies. And Jessica, that answers your question as well. So if the resit, do they take the higher grade? Yes, it is the higher grade, not the most recent. Okay, so that's all our questions for now, Pauline. So if we can move on to the internal synoptic project there, I've got slide 20 on the screen.
That's right, yeah. Okay, this is Unit 2, which leads to the internal synoptic project. So the internal assessment is in that form. It's a synoptic project which will be externally set by NCSE. That's obviously to make sure that it's sufficiently rigorous and has the level of quality that is expected of us. Each year there will be a different synoptic brief, and that will be released each December, and it will comprise a number of tasks which will assess the learner in each of the AOs, and we'll be having a look at that later. Grading descriptors for each assessment objective in the synoptic project are available in the spec between pages 19 to 21, just for your reference. And for Unit 2, there are again 3 learning outcomes. The guided learning hours are 72. The unit weighting is 60%. And as I said, it's externally set by NCSE. You internally assess it and internally quality assure it. And then we externally quality assure the synoptic project as well. As Karen said, they've got 22 hours for that brief. They are entitled to 2 submissions if necessary. And a key thing to bear in mind, the only evidence that we see when we come and visit you is with our normal external quality assurance visit, is actually the synoptic project. We don't externally quality assure all the work that you've done to get the learners ready for that. It's purely the project or the brief that we are looking to externally quality assure, which in some ways makes things a bit easier for you, because some of the issues around writing frames and templates in preparing the learners is not such an issue anymore. Obviously, we don't expect to see that within the synoptic project, but it's not something that you've got to be wary of in your preparation with the learners when you're teaching them and getting them ready for the actual synoptic project. As I said, it comprises 3 learning outcomes and obviously has a strong practical focus, because it's really allowing the learner to demonstrate the skills they've learned over the duration of the course, and it's entirely internally assessed, as I've said. It covers all of the 5 assessment objectives, and you've got to make sure, obviously, that your learners are well prepared for that. And you can see the 3 learning outcomes there: understand preparation and cooking skills, understand recipe development, and understand how to plan and produce dishes in response to a brief. And we'll come on to that in more detail on the next slide. So learning outcome 1, understand the preparation of cooking skills. They've obviously got to know the key stages of a recipe, the effects of the ingredients. They've got to know the preparation skills and the cooking skills, and they will cover a range of different areas that we'll come and have a look at in a minute. Again, you've got to make sure that you've covered for this unit a minimum of 6 dishes. And that's to prepare them so that when they get on to the Synoptic Project, they've had sufficient coverage of a variety of cooking skills that they are able to respond to the Synoptic Project effectively. So, though it's not something that we EQA as such, you will need to make sure for this particular unit, the learning outcome 1, and further dishes later on, you will have covered a minimum of 6 dishes. So obviously when it comes to things like key stages of a recipe, they'll need to understand the difference between the ingredients, the method, the sequence, oven times and temperatures, all the equipment that's needed, skills that are required, that type of thing. When it comes to the effect of the ingredients, this is something that I think you need to be really clear about, because with the existing visa, we sometimes find some confusion over this. We're wanting learners to know and understand the effects that ingredients have in a recipe, and these effects will include things like aeration, thickening, shortening, setting, aesthetics, and taste. So learners need to be able to unpick that, in a sense, for the dishes that they're making, and be able to explain what the aeration process is happening, how does thickening happening when we're making a soup or a sauce, etc. So it's got to be really clear that they've understood all of that. And as I said, they must know and understand the following through the preparation and cooking of a minimum of 6 dishes. And if you look at the preparation skills there, we've divided them up between preparation and cooking. Obviously weighing, measuring, peeling, chopping, creaming, rubbing in for preparation skills. And then the cooking skills that we would expect them to cover include things like simmering, boiling, stir frying, grilling, shallow frying, microwaving, roasting, steaming, poaching, sautéing, baking, stewing, casseroling, and sauce making. Now, some people will say, how can we possibly do all of those? There is a notion that some of those things can be taught, not always through an individual completing every single skill, and it may be through demonstration, through research, but also learners to work in pairs, that type of thing. But also many dishes can, if they're chosen wisely, can have a composite number of skills within them. So perhaps for one dish you are managing to tick off 3-4 skills just by choosing a particular dish. And as I said, we don't specify the dishes, we specify the skills, and that enables the teacher to draw on her own particular background or his particular background, and also to accommodate the type of learner that they have. So I think it's important that you have that degree of flexibility, but you have the skills, so you know the ones that you must include. Sensory factors, they have to know and understand that amending ingredients in a recipe will affect the sensory factors, and obviously this must include taste, texture, appearance, and smell. And as I said, not every single skill would necessarily be a full class practical, bearing in mind the guided learning hours available, but you should make sure that the range of skills are encompassed across individual dishes. In terms of cooking skills, again, we want to make sure that people have fully understood this. Sorry, it is mentioned there, so we've mentioned that range. And they also do need to understand the principles behind those cooking skills. So again, we've sometimes found a bit of confusion around this, that cooking skills are the actual cooking method, and that a learner does know, what simmering is and which foods are appropriate to simmer or to boil or to grill. They understand that some foods are not appropriate for certain cooking methods and why. So that's an area, again, where I think we need to be sure that learners are really clear about the content, because in the existing research we do sometimes find there is confusion as to what they refer to. Moving on to the next slide. Learning outcome 2, understand recipe development, amending recipes, the preparation of different types of dishes. Now again, you'll see I've got there a minimum of 6 dishes, and they've got to be able to evaluate and complete the dishes. So for the recipe development, learners will be able to understand how to amend and develop recipes to cater to the nutritional needs of specific groups of people. And they'll be able to demonstrate cooking dishes using a variety of ingredients and evaluate the sensory changes produced by the amendment. So the amending recipes, that might link to different age groups, and again, as I said, they're specified within specifications. They might be linked to food-related health conditions, lactose intolerance, wheat intolerance, celiac disease, nut allergy, etc., coronary heart disease. They might be linked to seasonality, so are they be able to amend and develop dishes based on using particular foods that are in season? And they might be linked to the factors affecting or determining food choices, so cultural, locality, accessibility, personal. And learners will need to know and understand how to prepare dishes using the following ingredients. So we've specified some there. So for example, we've said meat, or if it's a vegetarian, they can use a vegetarian alternative. Pastry, fish, if they don't wish to handle fish or don't eat fish, they could substitute that for rice, pasta, fruit, vegetables. So there's a big range of things that they've got to draw on, and as I said, they must prepare a minimum of 6 dishes as part of that. And they must also be able to evaluate their dishes, and when they consider that, they've got to look at the choice of ingredients they've made and how those affect the taste, the appearance, the smell and texture within their dish. Okay, moving on to 23. Learning outcome 3 now. Understand how to plan and produce dishes in response to the brief. This, of course, is very similar to the existing Unit 4. They've got to be able to interpret a brief and select a menu of dishes that are suitable for that brief. They've got to be able to create action plans when they're cooking the dishes that they've chosen, and they've got to be able to revise and improve their action plan based on feedback. One of the things you need to bear in mind there is that sometimes we see feedback that is far too specific from the teacher in particular. It should enable the learner to reflect and look back on how they can improve, but it shouldn't tell them very specifically, this is what you need to do. They've got to be able to prepare and cook a 2-course menu, and they need to be given that opportunity to practice that prior to the Synoptic Project being issued, because obviously if the first time they cook a 2-course meal within a 2-hour time frame is when they've had that release, they're probably not going to be as well prepared as they should be. So sometimes you might choose to just get learners to plan for different briefs, so they're getting used to responding to different needs, different dietary groups. But obviously sometimes it would be very helpful if they can have that 2-hour session so that they're able to create a time plan and work through that, showing dovetailing and making sure that they've covered the range of skills. And then they've got to be able to look back and see how well they've achieved whatever the brief set out, and they've got to be able to review or evaluate that. It specifies for the 2-course meal a starter and a main course, or a main course and a dessert. It doesn't specify accompaniments, so there isn't really a need for them to prepare vegetables, potatoes, etc. They may well produce a sauce which is integral to the dish, or a specific accompaniment, but it's not a potato or a vegetable dish, because the key thing is that they're building their skills into their 2 items that they've chosen. And that really, obviously, will be within the Synoptic Project. It's part of the culmination of the skills you've developed over the period of the course. So we would expect to see skillful dishes. We wouldn't expect to see basic composite dishes that aren't really demonstrating those range of skills that they've learned as part of the course. They will need to be able to action plan, and they'll need to include things like dovetailing, the list of ingredients, their equipment, utensils, cooking skills, the timings that they're going to use, the sequence, and obviously any health and safety considerations as part of that process to do with self or to do with the environment. They will have the opportunity to get some feedback, and then they should respond to that. As I said, it shouldn't be too specific. It should just enable the learner to see, this is an area. So teacher might reference something like, do you think your timings are as accurate as they need to be? That would be okay. But if the teacher said, you must start the yeast first of all because that's going to take longer, then obviously that's giving the learner too much specific information. Bear in mind that the two courses should reference, as I've said, a main course and a starter, or a main course and dessert. And even if the brief is quite different for that, is based around, for example, a party or some such other occasion, they should still think, is this something that could be considered to be a main course or a dessert or a starter, and not something, for example, that might just be something like a biscuit mixture or something like that we sometimes see. It's got to actually be main course, starter or dessert. They've got to look at how successful they've been in responding to the brief, and they've got to consider their ability to follow the recipe and how successful that's been, their strengths and weaknesses of their choice of menu, their strengths and weaknesses of the planning and preparation process, and then the success of the items in terms of the sensory attributes, including taste, texture, appearance, and smell. Moving on to the next slide. This now is actually showing you a draft internal Synoptic project. So you can see there's a project brief, and I think it's worth talking you through this because obviously this is the first time you will have seen this, and this is quite different from what we've been used to. Sorry, it's just jumped on me from my slides. So it says a local chef wants to recruit 2 part-time staff to work in his kitchen. To help him recruit for the roles, he's created a series of tasks to be completed by those learners wishing to apply for the job. He wants applicants to show that they can prepare dishes for different purposes. These 5 dishes will be a teenager who is a vegetarian, an adult who is lactose intolerant, a young child aged between 5 and 10 who does not like to eat some fruit and vegetables, and then a 2-course meal for an event. So they've got to include all of that within their Synoptic project within the 22 hours. And bear in mind, the internal Synoptic project obviously draws on the content covered in both Unit 1 and Unit 2. It's entirely assessed through the Synoptic project, covering all the assessment objectives. And as I said, learners have 2 attempts at submitting for this particular Synoptic assignment. It will be the same one, so they don't get a separate one. If they do a resubmission, they're improving what they've already done. So when we come to look at this as EQAs, we will only look at the Synoptic project. We won't look at the 6 dishes you did for the unit earlier on that showed the skills, or that showed the other 6 dishes that showed how they could amend and develop recipes, or the given briefs that you've practiced in preparation for this. We will just look at the Synoptic project, and that's how, when we come in, that's what we'll be looking to see, and we will either be obviously agreeing your decisions or not, and obviously giving you feedback either way. Learners are required to keep a learner log, which NCFE are producing, to record their approach to each task, and that obviously will help them in terms of where they are, in terms of what they've done as part of that. If we continue on to the next slide, you'll see the tasks there broken down. So it's reflecting back on what we've just looked at, but it'll say task 1, the chef wants to ensure ensure applicants work safely, hygienically, and understand the needs of different customers. And they're required to provide information on preparing a safe kitchen for preparing a safe kitchen to display in the kitchen. That doesn't make sense. Provide information to preparing a safe kitchen for display in the kitchen, to describe the importance of preventing cross-contamination when preparing and cooking food for people with allergies and intolerances. So that's the first task they've got to do. Then he wants to see the plans for cooking for different customers. So this is about what have they decided to cook. You know, they will have no doubt have done some research to come up with the dishes for the various people specified there. So that's what he will want to see. Maybe there'll be a range of dishes, and then they'll say, this is the one that I've chosen. So they've shown that they've researched the individual needs of the groups of people that have been specified there. And they'll have to explain the reasons that they've made those choices. And then task 3 will be planning, which is an important part of the preparation and cooking. And the chef wants to see how you plan cooking your dishes. And this is where the time plan or action plan comes in. And they'll be required to produce an action plan for cooking for each of the dishes in the kitchen, including resources and timings. And then the chef wants to see your cooking skills and completed dishes. And so then they'll be required, obviously, to cook the dishes. Sorry, my thing keeps jumping around here. So he'll want to see the cooking skills carried out on the completed dishes, and he'll want to see a storyboard for each recipe demonstrating the key stages of the cooking processes, and to present the completed dishes. And the two-course menu must be cooked in 1 hour, in 1 2-hour session. So they can't cook one item in the morning and one in the afternoon. They have to be given those 2 hours continuous to cook for those 2 dishes, which form part of that brief, the 2-course meal. So that's something that you will need to factor in, just as you have with Unit 4 really currently, to make sure the learners are having that opportunity, because they must not do that. It's 2 separate dishes. And what we're looking for there, obviously, is to make sure that we can see a good range of dovetailing, that the order and the sequence is appropriate, that the timing is good, and that they have chosen dishes that are sufficiently skillful with a reasonable number of stages attached to each.
Pauline, I'm just going to interrupt you there, because we're very close to 5 o'clock, so I think we need to very quickly just move on. Yeah. So obviously, if you want to quickly whiz through task 5, and then we'll move on to actually assessing Unit 2, if that's okay.
Yes, so task 5 really, that's just where they're evaluating. So they'll be looking back at what they've done, and they'll be making sure that they've evaluated the dishes that they've cooked, etc. So
right, I'm just going to move on to slide 27, Pauline, which is the 3 bands. Obviously, this is what changed.
So, yeah. Originally, because obviously there are, if you like, 7 potential grades from a not yet achieved right through to a level 2 distinction, we did have a descriptor for each of those, and feedback from the DFE was perhaps that was too onerous and quite difficult for teachers to be able to distinguish between that number. So it's now divided up into 3 bands with those 3 descriptors. And the example on the screen shows you AO4, which is the demonstrate and apply technical skills and process, which is the meaty part really of that, because that carries the 45%. And you can see, if you just look at those 3 descriptors, how it's not too difficult to see how you would perhaps fit learners into one of those 3 categories. And you can see some of the key words are in bold, so basic cooking skills when we're looking at 1, partially completed, and then we're looking in band 2, mostly relevant, mostly appropriate, mostly complete working outcomes, and then band 3, relevant cooking skills, effectively by applying and using appropriate equipment, and obviously applying cooking skills to develop a complete and effective learning outcome. So it's just showing you how when you're marking and grading the Synoptic project, you would have those 3 bands that you refer to for each of the assessment objectives. Okay, Karen, I think.
Right, I'm going to very quickly talk you through a grading calculator that we've provided. So on the website, you'll find the link to the grading calculator, and that's amongst all of the documents for the new model. So the link will allow you to download the calculator, so you can then save it to your work area and edit it as you wish. And we've been assured that this can't be broken. So if anybody wants to try that, you're more than welcome. So what it does is it allows you to enter learner outcomes and calculate their overall grade. So it'll work once you've had the results from your first external assessment attempt. You could do a mock external assessment and use results from that as well, but it's a great tool for planning and reporting because it gives you a real-time indicator as to where your learners are currently. But it could also be a really good motivating tool because you can show learners what they could achieve if they do make improvements to the work. So on this example here, I've used myself as an example, and you can see I've got a level 1 merit for my external assessment, and I've entered a grade 1, 2 or 3 from those grading bands that Pauline's just talked through there for each of the AOs, the assessment objectives. You can see as well that for AO2 I haven't achieved anything there, so I've got 0. That's not yet achieved for that unit, but because it's a compensatory model, I do still get a qualification overall. So you can see that the current maximum grade that I could achieve is a level 1 distinction. So the minimum's level 1 merit, maximum's level 1 distinction. So that would depend on exactly what UMS score I got for my level 1 merit. So if I just scraped a level 1 merit, that might mean I only get a level 1 merit overall. But if I got a really high level 1 merit, possibly nearer a level 2 pass, or a level 1 distinction that would be, then I might end up with a level 1 distinction overall. Now if I move on to the next slide here, you can see what I've done is I've changed AO4 from a 2 to a 3. So I've added more to AO4, I've shown more demonstration there, and what that's done is that's lifted my minimum and maximum overall grade there to a level 2 pass. So that just might be a little bit of motivation if you've got learners who you want to come and do a little bit more work. You can actually show them, look, for their second submission, this is what could happen if you actually come and make amendments to your Synoptic project. So that's tools available for you to use once you've downloaded it from the website, and like our IT department have assured us that that can't be broken. So if anybody wants to test that theory, that would be welcome. Now we do have quite a few questions in, Pauline, so I'm going to quickly go through those before we talk about resources. So I'm just going to scroll up here. So are you expecting to see both action plans in the portfolio?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
You would?
Yes, because we need to see what they started with and what they ended up with, and we need to see the feedback, just as we do now, so that we can see this is what the learner initially did, and now they've been able to revise that action plan, and hopefully the feedback that we will see has not been too specific.
Right. Yes. Okay, and Sarah's asked, will moderation still be via a visit into school or via post?
No, we anticipate it'll still be via visit, because obviously we'll still need to look at the Synoptic project, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of work entailed within that, and we'll need to see that, to see how you've assessed and graded it, to see your feedback, and to see whether we agree with the grading that you've allocated.
Right.
We'll be looking at your internal quality assurance process as well to see that that's happened before we EQA. So yes, we anticipate a visit, and potentially 2 visits if there's a resubmission. Yeah.
So Belinda's also asked, how detailed would you expect the students to explain, for example, aeration, because she teaches in an ASD SEND school, and students would find that difficult?
Well, obviously your explanation of that is really going to be in the work that leads up to the Synoptic Project. You might be asked for something on another example. I can't say what that would be. But the key thing is do they understand? So it's about when they're actually cooking something that involves aeration, do they understand that process? And I think what we would expect is a small explanation that they've written out so that they have some understanding of what is taking place when, for example, they make a Swiss roll, and the importance of aeration in making that dish a successful outcome. But we're not expecting a lot of science behind it. And bear in mind, that's more for the preparation of the Synoptic Project. I can't say that there'll never be something included in that doesn't pick up on the effects of ingredients in a recipe, but you're developing their understanding really in preparation for that Synoptic Project.
Yeah, well, our VSETs are very popular in PRUs and centres who deal with learners that have SEND needs. What you might find is that a learner might struggle to communicate that in writing, but if they can explain verbally, then you could potentially submit an audio recording as evidence. That would be okay as well, wouldn't it, Pauline?
It would, but as I've said, we probably won't need to see that evidence because that's preparing them for the Synoptic Project.
But if
so it's unlikely we would specify that sort of thing within the project. But what we would expect is that they have an understanding of that so that when they're talking about their action plan, it becomes obvious that they understand the importance, for example, of aeration in achieving a successful outcome when they made a Swiss roll, for example, or a souffle or whatever.
Yeah, great. Right, okay then. So Hannah's asked, are students allowed to access their notes from Unit 1 and 2 while completing the Synoptic assessment?
We've had this query raised at the Prepare to Teach event, and that question has gone back so that we can identify precisely how much they can and cannot access. Yep. So I can't give you a definitive response on that, but it is something that we're aware that's been flagged as a query from centres, and we're seeking final
I think the idea is that some elements of the Synoptic Project could be open book for learners, but the guidance for conduct of internal assessment for the new model is just currently being finalised, but that will be published prior to obviously this going live in September. So Catherine's asked, do you list the practical skills in tiers, for example, pass merit distinction, which students can select from in the Synoptic assessment?
No, we don't. We list a range of skills and we assume that you as teachers obviously will be able to say these are more basic skills, perhaps more appropriate for level 1 learners, and the more advanced skills. We do give some examples of what we might consider to be fairly advanced skills in the specifications, so things like lemon meringue pie, lasagna, moussaka, things that have got a range of skills. We have given some examples in the specifications, but as I said before, you determine the dishes that you choose your learners to cook, but you're just doing a skills audit when you make that choice to make sure you've got good coverage of the skills. And obviously a learner that's being awarded a level 1, we wouldn't necessarily expect the same skills base as somebody at the top end of level 2.
Yes, it's worth mentioning as well that the product development team are currently providing, they're currently in the process of collating sample portfolios. So there'll be a sample portfolio, I believe there'll be a level 1 merit, a level 2 pass and a level 2 distinction. So that should give you an idea of the range, you know, across the spectrum of grades available. So that will be available, those will be available for you for September Go Live. Hannah's asked, do they get mise en place time on top of the 2 hours for their menu? Or would you expect that all to take place in the 2 hours?
No, everything they do is within the 2 hours. And again, that's why we don't expect the potatoes and the vegetables. We want the 2 dishes to be skillful. And because mise en place is part of that, you know, we don't expect them to do potatoes and vegetables. Obviously, we wouldn't see it as being unrealistic if there was some degree of washing up left to do at the end of a practical, particularly with the items that they finished off towards the end of the period of time. But we would expect that there had been cleaning as you go, and that wasn't this huge pile of dishes in the sink that showed that the learner hadn't done anything throughout the practical other than do the cooking and had ignored all their cleaning down and washing up.
Right, okay. Susan's asked, for task 3, would you advise different formats for the action plans? I worry that 5 of the same action plans would be far too dull. Is variety important to maintain learner enthusiasm and interest? I think this goes back to... Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it's entirely up to you, because we do see a range of action plans now. Different centres use different formats. So that's, again, entirely up to the centre. But obviously you will need to include the things that are specified, like health and safety practices, skills used, equipment and utensil used. So you can choose how you do that. And it even may vary from learner to learner, because some learners prefer to work in a, say, a table format, others don't. So that's entirely up to you. But what it must show are those key things I mentioned earlier, things like dovetailing, an appropriate sequence, appropriate timing. So all of those things would need to be integral to that. But the actual format, again, we're happy for you to determine that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what would happen between the March and the December. This is where you would teach the learners how to do an action plan. And what should happen in the Synoptic Project is learners should respond independently. So if they want to do 5 action plans that are the same format, that really should be up to them. If they want to vary it, again, that should be up to them, but that should be them responding independently. So would you agree with that, Pauline?
I do. The only thing I would say, I don't think it's necessary to feel that you have to change the format for the different items. I don't think there's any additional marks to be gained there.
Yeah.
The key thing is that when we look at the action plan, is the timing appropriate? Is the dovetailing taking place? Is the sequence relevant? Have they listed the other things like health and safety points? Have they shown an understanding of the method that they're doing, key points to watch out for, that type of thing? So we wouldn't necessarily expect different formats for the different items specified within the brief.
Yeah, I'm really aware of time because we have gone over by nearly 15 minutes. So I've got 2 more questions here that I'm going to read out, and then we'll quickly move on to resources. So just looking at the brief, there are 5 user groups on here. Will the students be expected to generate ideas or plans for each of the 5 user groups, or will it be allowed or expected to select one to plan and make for?
Sorry, I'm not clear what you meant there, Karen.
So on the brief, I'm just going to go back in my notes here. On the brief, he wants it says that the chef wants applicants to show that they can prepare 5 dishes for different purposes. So the 5 dishes.
So the teenager, they've got to do all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, they must include all of those.
Yeah.
So they've got to do those individual dishes for the group specified, and then they've got to also include the 2-course menu for the given brief.
Right, okay then. And another one
There's
from...
no choice, you've got to do all of it.
Yeah. Another one from Susan here. What's an ideal time frame for learners to do their first submission for the Synoptic Project in order for them to be able to potentially resubmit after EQA? Well, what we've advised there, Susan, is that your first submission should take place in March, and that should give time. I mean, this will depend on your centre, it will depend on your circumstances, but that should give time for you to plan in a second EQA visit. But what you will have to be aware of is at that time of year, your EQA is probably going to be really busy. So it's a really good idea to get those planned in well in advance. Right, one last question here from Marius before we moved on. Based on the previous question, many teachers don't have the catering background. Wouldn't it be better to let learners know list of skills for each grade? Otherwise it's a guessing game. I think that's referring to whether we're saying skills for pass merit distinction.
Yeah. I mean, they don't need to have a catering background. I mean, this qualification is really aimed at teachers who've got a food and nutrition background who aren't catering in background themselves. Obviously, if you've got a catering background, you probably do have more extensive practical skills, but I think the level of the qualification doesn't actually demand that. I think the key thing is that when you choose the dishes, you think about the level of skill that your learners have, and that you make sure you cover a range of dishes that accommodates, you know, your level 1 learners up to learners perhaps who you know are very good practically and could be looking to be at a distinction level for that element of the course, really. So that's why we leave it up for you to determine, really. And I think if you look at the list of skills, you know, you could list the number of dishes that contain those skills and then think, well, you know, some of these are quite advanced and might be only suitable for some learners, and some are more basic and would be more appropriate for level 1 learners, particularly those at the lower end of the level 1. And we can't know that about your learners. And I think, you know, there is an element of you have to make that choice. We've listed the skills, so you know they must be encompassed in the choice of dishes. But there are so many dishes, as you'll know, that could accompany that list of skills. It's just an endless, endless list. So we do leave that down to the teacher, you know, and I think they should be in a situation to make that professional decision, really.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, everybody, for all of your questions. We are going to go through the last few slides about learner resources now, but if you do have any further questions, please type them in, because I will be answering those, and you'll get a transcript of those. I know we're not responding to them in the session, but you will get answers to those questions. So if you have any more, please type them in. So I'm just going to very quickly go through with you what resources will be available. So for this new model, NCFE have taken on board feedback from centres about resources and exemplar materials. So in addition to the sample material that's currently online, we'll also be providing classroom support packs for centres, and they're going to include PowerPoints, lesson plans, worksheets, and a revision booklet for Unit 1 as well. So that will support learners with the external assessment. And we've already prepared to teach events this term in Newcastle, Manchester, London and Bristol. But we are also in the process of planning more for the autumn term, so that should support you further with the delivery of the qualification. So like I mentioned on the previous slide, each VCERT qualification will have a supporting classroom pack. So your session plans or your lesson plans are going to have your learning outcomes, starter activities, opportunities for reflection, activities and related homework tasks, and there'll be PowerPoint presentations to accompany these plans as well. And the Unit 1 materials, obviously it's designed for Unit 1 to be delivered first, so they're going to be available for the start of teaching in September 2018 at the latest. So the resources are currently going through final checks before being published, so they may be available sooner, but as soon as they are available, communications will go out to centres and they'll be available via the website, but they will be available to approved centres only. But we'll tell you about that as soon as they're free. If anybody's on the Facebook group for the NCFE Food and Cookery qualification, you'll know Caroline Gallagher's on there. As soon as they're ready, she'll be advertising that as well. So a few days after this webinar, I'm going to send you an email with a link to the recording from this afternoon and a copy of the slides that we've used today. And on this slide, you're going to find hyperlinks to some useful documents and a short video clip that highlights some key facts about the new model VCERTs. So now that Pauline and I have talked you through the new model, I am going to send out one last poll. I just want to see what your thoughts are on this the new model. So that should be available for you to respond to there. I just want to find out the general opinion towards this qualification. So that's really good to see. Pauline, I think we've got about 80% are either very or fairly positive about it. So, I mean, if anybody is... That is really good, isn't it? I mean, if anybody is a bit unsure or if you do have any further questions, please feel free to email me in response to the email that I send you. I'm also going to put on the screen here if I go here, the top email there, curriculum@ncfe, that comes through to my team, so I'll be able to pick that up. So if you have any questions before I send you the email, it does normally take me a couple of days to pull all the information together, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. So I'd like to thank you for all your great questions this afternoon, and thank you for joining us, and thank you to Pauline for going through all of that information. And I'm going to say good afternoon now. I hope you enjoy the sunshine. Okay then, so bye everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.